was from one of their Focus on the Family shows. But you always have to be aware of what's influencing the people who are trying to influence us. And then that way you've got it in balance. It's a little bit more balance. Okay, so what happens if your kids don't get enough sleep? I said 8 to 10 hours sleep a night. Oh, here's the other thing that's really ironic. We were discussing this last night at dinner, is that most kids, adolescents and teenagers, their normal sleep cycle is late at night to late in the morning. And you've probably noticed this about your teenagers. They don't want to go to bed at night. They're ready to go. 10, 11 o'clock is when they're ready to hit the sack. But if they need 10 hours sleep and they're hitting the sack at 11, what time do they have to be at school in the morning? They're coming to school before they've had a chance to rejuvenate that brain. And that's what Saturdays, as much as I hate to say this, because this will kind of contradict my next point, but Saturdays, kids probably need to sleep in the morning. They need to catch up, because if they don't, they're going to get that deficit. And I can tell you from personal experience, when you're sleep deprived, strange things begin to happen in your brain. It really gets out of whack. And so I'd encourage you to make sure that happens. Here's what happens if you don't get enough sleep. These are studies, I just completed this study about 6 months ago. Not getting enough sleep or having sleep difficulties can, number one, limit your ability to learn, listen, concentrate, and solve problems. You may even forget important information like names, numbers, your homework, or a date with a special person in your life. A date. Imagine that. A teenager could forget about a date if they're not getting enough sleep. I think that's a misprint. It will make you more prone to pimples. Lack of sleep can contribute to acne and other skin problems. It leads to aggressive or inappropriate behavior, such as yelling at your friends or being impatient with your teachers or family members. I thought this was just being a teenager. These are all actually sleep deprivation issues. It can cause you to eat too much or eat unhealthy foods like sweets, fried foods that lead to weight gain. It can heighten the effect of alcohol and possibly increase use of caffeine and nicotine. And it contributes to illness, not using equipment safely, or driving drowsy. Those are all aspects of not sleeping enough. Now, I remember when I was a kid, Saturday morning was not sleep time. Saturday morning was chore time. So we didn't sleep any later on Saturday morning than we did the rest of the week. I think Susan had that same experience when she was growing up. It was Saturday morning, it was time. The house is going to be all taking care of everything that happened during the week, and everybody had chores, and you vacuumed and you cleaned stuff up and raked the yard and did all that stuff. Okay, now, I'm not saying that's not important, but I am saying it is critical, especially for our teenagers and adolescent kids, that they get the proper amount of sleep. Which actually leads to the next point for our raising our kids, and that is work is not part of the curse. If you do a little bit of reading in Genesis, you'll find out that Adam was given the job of tending the garden before the fall. A lot of times we like to say, oh yeah, I'm working, and working's a job. No, work is a gift that God has given us. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it when we're working for people that are, a little bit crazy, but it is. It's not part of the curse. Proverbs 19:5 says, slothfulness casts into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. And in the New Testament it says, if you don't work, you don't eat. So I guess that's kind of related there. This is something we need to give we need to impress upon our kids, is a necessity to work. Some of the fondest memories I have as a maybe 5 to 10-year-old child was going to work with my father. During the summertime, at least once a month, he'd come to me, come home from work one day and say, hey, you want to go to work with me tomorrow? And my dad worked on a job where he'd leave 7 o'clock in the morning, he'd come back 5 o'clock in the evening, and the whole time he was out there working, and he'd invite me along with him. I could drive to work with him. I could be part of the job that he was doing. He would even give me little jobs, assignments that I could do while I was there. Mom would make lunch and put it in his big metal lunchbox, the mysterious lunchbox that he carried out with him every day and then brought home every night, you know. And she'd put stuff in there for me. So when he opened the lunchbox, it had my stuff in there too. And we'd sit around and we'd talk at lunch. He always took a full lunch break. It was kind of interesting. Take a half hour. And I don't know what he did when I wasn't there, but when I was there, we'd sit and we'd talk. You know, he'd tell me. You know, he does, one of his jobs involves kind of plumbing. He was what he did, he installed water softeners. And so if he was halfway through a job and he had a pipe that was dripping, he'd always tell me, or he wouldn't tell me. One time he told me that he didn't like my mom's homemade bread. And I said, why? He says, well, because when the pipe is dripping, the Wonder Bread, you just take it and you wad it up and you can stuff it in that pipe and it'll keep it from dripping. But you can't wad up the homemade bread. It's too crummy. So it's wisdom that you learn from your parents, you know. I never would have learned that if I hadn't gone out to work with him. And so that was a very important part. And then we were always expected to do work at home. As I said, Saturday morning was chore time. Each of us had our own assigned chores that had to be done. And so as a kid, I learned how to do the job, and I also learned how to work a job. Because I'm here to tell you, after 45 years of working in the world, I'd never had a boss that set the standards as high as my parents set. They made sure I did the job, and I did the job right. And this is an important thing to teach a child. Now, we don't start right from the beginning, you know. When they're 5, if they miss a spot when they're sweeping or whatever it is. It was Garrett. Susan worked with a guy or a woman who used to think she was so cruel because when Garrett was 5, he had to do his own laundry. All the kids did their own laundry. And he tells a story, I don't recall it, he tells a story of me coming home from work one day with a step stool so he could reach the clothesline to get up there and hang his clothes on the clothesline because we didn't have a dryer. But they did, and Susan's coworker, she just thought she was being so cruel. You know, she was the Hispanic mom whose little boys were princes, you know. They ruled the roost. They were in charge, you know, and she catered to her sons. And how could Susan treat him so cruelly as to make him work? Well, it's important that kids learn how to work. We learned it when we were growing up. We taught it to our kids when they're growing up. So the chores, jobs, working for charity and working in ministry. My daughter Vicki came to me about a year ago and she said, is there a needy family in the congregation who might need some housework done? And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of them. She says, because I want to take my kids and go clean up somebody's house. That's what she does for a living. She's a professional housekeeper. And she says, I want to take a Saturday and go to somebody's house, and we're going to go in there. I and the kids are going to go in there and just clean it from top to bottom. And no charge. She bring her own cleaning stuff and everything. Really blessed a woman in the congregation by doing that. But she also taught her kids that we're given an awful lot, and it's part of our responsibility as a Christian is to give back, is to tithe your work. I don't know if that's a biblical principle or not, but I've always tried to give at least 10% of a work week to something I'm not getting paid for. I learned that from my dad. People used to criticize my dad. He would go over, if he had a friend that needed something done, he'd go over and volunteer to help him. He'd work on projects that'll last weeks sometimes and never charge a penny for it. But that's what I learned that from him, because you give. And this was not a man that was rich and could afford to do that. And we had 8 people in the family, and he never earned more than $100 a week in his entire life. And we never missed a meal. We always had a roof over our head and a warm house to live in. But he just knew the value, and he would give away his time. And I think that's important for our kids to learn how to do. At a certain age, and my personal opinion, this is not doctrinal, about age 12 or so, a child should start contributing to the family. They should have some way of earning some money, and then part of that money needs to come back into the family budget. They need to understand that yes, we're responsible for them, we're going to take care of their needs, but they also need to contribute to the family and come back. My daughter was babysitting. She was the most talented babysitter in the world. And she'd take care of kids that were on medical care. She would take care of them when she was 8, 9 years old. She was very talented in that area. My sons did whatever they could do, sometimes yard work or whatever. I remember Garrett came to me one time and he said, I want a skateboard. I said, well, good for you. Go get one. I should tell you, our policy was we met our children's needs, but we didn't meet their wants or their desires. Great example. They need shoes. We'll go down to Payless and we'll buy the $4 sneakers. If they're too embarrassed to wear the $4 sneakers to school, they can go earn some money and pay for that little trademark on the side. We did that all their lives, even when we could afford to give them more. We provided their needs. All you need is a shirt. Yeah, but they got these ones that got the thing. Okay, well, here's a shirt. The difference between the shirt that we're going to buy you and the shirt you want to buy is $17. Throw $17 in the kitty, and you'll have the shirt. So Garrett knew better when he came to me and said he wanted a skateboard. We didn't just buy the kids stuff like that. That was expensive. Skateboard, he didn't just want one like I used to have, with the steel wheels nailed onto the 4x4 or 2x4. He wanted a real skateboard, with that little no-slip surface and the rubber wheels and all that. I said, well, we just gotten 16 yards of river rock delivered to the house. It was all in 2 piles at the side of the house. And I said, that river rock needs to all be put down in these tree wells. We had 1/3 of an acre, and we had about 20 trees, and I just landscaped the whole thing. I says, you put all that river rock in those tree wells, and you can have a skateboard. Well, he's, kids. I don't know what he was then, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. Yeah, I'll do that. He went out and got a wagon, and he was individually putting river rock in the wagon, wheeling it over, dumping the wagon, raking them around. He'd been working on that about 6 hours one Saturday, and I came out, and as a neglectful father, I had not provided gloves for him. I didn't even think about it. And I looked at I brought him a lemonade or something, and he reached for the lemonade, and his fingers were all raw, and they weren't quite bleeding, but you can tell he's done a lot of work on those river rocks, and his hands were all dried up. I says, man, doesn't that hurt when you pick up the rocks? He says, I'm not thinking about my fingers. I'm thinking about the skateboard. That's a strong-willed child. He's not going to let something like a couple bloody fingers get in the way of the goal that he wanted. He earned that skateboard. He got that skateboard. But he had to earn it. We made sure our kids learned. We gave them very minimal allowances. In fact, I think most of their allowances ended up going back into the food budget, but because we couldn't really afford. But we paid for their needs, and then they paid for anything else that they wanted. Our policy, and they knew this from day one, two rules in the house. If you want to drive the car when you're 16, you're paying your own insurance. They knew that from the time they were 13 or 14 and figured out that they were going to get a driver's license someday. You're paying for your own insurance. We're not paying your insurance. And when you graduate from high school and that summer passes, you are going to be enrolled in college or paying us rent. Those are the only 2 options. And those were rules that we set for our kids, and they abode by those rules. And so it became a very good lesson for them. I remember when my oldest son got his driver's license, we happened to be on a family vacation. We'd taken 6 weeks to drive around the country. We did, I don't remember what it was, 6,400 miles or something like that, driving around the country. And we were going to leave before he got his driver's license, so he stayed with my sister and got his driver's license, so then he flew out and met us on our vacation, on our driving vacation, and drove the rest of the way. He got to drive. I think he drove 2,000 miles on that trip. Brand new 16-year-old with a license. And so we come back after the vacation. We're sitting in the living room. They've got to pay their own insurance. He didn't pay his insurance. We gave him that insurance as a birthday present the first month. And so we're sitting in the living room, and I said, you think you might be driving the car next week? He says, oh, yeah, I'm hoping to. I said, how are you going to pay for the insurance? He went, oh, yeah. He went in, took a shower, got in some nice clothes, headed up Oracle Road, stopped at every fast food place till he got a job, and came back, and he's now 43. And he's worked every day of his life since that first day. Had to have a job to get the money to pay for the insurance so he could drive the car. These are responsibilities. I'm not saying these are hard and fast rules, but they worked for us. They really did. And if you set some standards for the kids, especially in the area of work, that'll pay off in the long run. All of our kids have always been gainfully employed. Okay, so let's take a couple minutes for questions, and then we're going to take a break, a longer break. The mics are available. The hands are raising. You want to ask me how I could be so cruel to my kids? Anybody? Questions, comments? What did you do? Your turn. Oh, there we go. We got them coming up over on the side here.
Now that the holidays are coming, did you teach your kids Santa Claus or trick-or-treating? What was your stance on those?
I don't know that we actually had a stance. Our kids went trick-or-treating for the candy. Then a movement came throughout the church that there was the demon's holiday and that sort of thing. And then the church started providing Hallelujah nights. We did one this year, as a matter of fact, at the church where you do all Bible costumes. I've never had a strong feeling one way or the other. I don't remember our kids ever believing in Santa Claus. I don't think we told them yay or nay on Santa Claus. I just don't think that they ever believed in Santa Claus. I grew up believing in Santa Claus. I was heartbroken when I found out he didn't exist. Susan told us on my second anniversary. He told me that Santa didn't exist because I was prepping. I want Santa to bring me such and such. We always kind of knew growing up because Santa Claus had the same handwriting as my mom. And Santa always gave us presents wrapped in the Sunday comics because my parents could never afford that fancy paper. So I don't know that I actually had a strong feeling on that. I've heard a lot of conversation last month among the Christian community about, whether Halloween has Christian roots, has demonic roots. I've never really to me, it has not ever been a major issue one way or the other. If our kids wanted to, put on a costume and go get some free candy, as long as they shared it with me, I was okay with that. I didn't have an opposition to that. But again, I'm not speaking for your local congregation here. If there's a standard here, then that's different than that. But we didn't. I don't think Christmas, we had our kids really got one present for Christmas. Because really, we grew up, when our kids were growing up, we did not have a lot of money. And so they got one present. They could pretty much pick that present. They could put a list and put like a star on the thing they wanted the most. As long as it worked in the budget, they could get that. And the rest of it was, the little stocking stuffer, $1 presents and that sort of thing. And to this day, we don't buy our kids presents anymore. They buy us presents. We don't buy them for them. But then again, they're all adults with kids of their own. I don't know if that answered that or not, but Susan and I never really had a strong opinion one way or the other. I know people that do have strong opinions. I remember when you changed the spelling of Santa to Satan, and that just tells you something. I went, I don't know. God didn't write the Bible in English anyway, so Santa wasn't spelled in that anyway. And I love the story of St. Nicholas. He saved girls from prostitution. That's where he started out. Giving money to families so their girls would not have to be sold into servitude. And many of the servitude positions were prostitution. I think that's pretty cool, So, anyway. Sorry if that's wishy-washy, but that's kind of who I am sometimes. Other questions? Over on the edge.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how did you get rid of your sleeping problem you said you had it for 20 years?
Yes. It's a very, very interesting story. Pastor Warner preached on sleep about 5 years ago. He did an entire sermon on sleep and the value of sleep. Gave me a really good biblical basis for it. But as anybody, when your pastor preaches on something, you're sitting in the service, you say, yeah, I'm going to go for that. And then a week later, it kind of. So before it could fade from my memory, I was listening to a Focus on the Family show. And the Focus on the Family show did 2 half-hour programs on sleep. Some guy from Great Britain who'd done a lot of study on it. And he not only reinforced what Pastor Warner had said from biblical perspective, but he added just a little taste of some scientific, what happens in the brain and all these things that happen to recycling the brain. And so I'm thinking, Pastor Warner, and then I heard this from Focus, and almost I'd be convinced, And then within a day or two, I was listening to a science podcast that just put the nail in the coffin, and they talked about all of the chemical reactions that happen inside the brain during sleep, and so that kind of convinced me that I just really needed to get, and I did. I had it really close to I'm going to say I was probably either clinically depressed or psychotic. I'm not sure which. I just went off the deep end with a bunch of stuff that was going on in my life, and I just wasn't able to cope. I decided, okay, I'm just going to get some sleep. And so I started getting to bed a lot earlier. Benjamin Franklin said, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Well, I'm healthy. Somewhat so. So yeah, that was just kind of a process for me. If you send to my email address and specifically in the subject line say sleep, I will pull up the links to those things that I listen to, and then you can go on the media portion of the Tucson Church website and ask for Pastor Warner's sermon on sleep. And I'm going to guess that was around 2012, 2011, somewhere around that. Okay. Well, we have a quandary here. Now we're getting the questions asked, but we also have donuts waiting in the other room. So, questions, donuts. As of Solomon, I'm going to do a Solomonic decision. We're going to eat the donuts, and we'll open the next session with questions and answers before we start. Okay? And I think it's always important that you pray for the donuts. So, brother, would you pray for the meal that we're about to partake of?
Father, bless us this morning with this great seminar.